So number one is the whole Miles Morales run. Actually, that is honestly what got me into comics. I did read a lot more older comics that my friends' parents used to collect, like Green Arrow or the old Spider-Man comics, Superman comics. But Miles Morales was honestly the first whole series that I collected myself and actually started buying every week, and it got me hooked. The character is relatable. Miles, it's a whole new identity from Peter Parker, and for a while it was better than Peter Parker. He was a great character. What I like most about him is that I guess he's kind of more relatable, since the whole universe he's in, the Ultimate Universe, where if you're dead, or you grow up as the years go, because as we know, Ultimate Peter, he grew up. Like, you see him grow up before your eyes, like every year. And same with Miles. Now that it's kind of over, you start with him being this 11-year-old kid, and he gets bit by a spider. His uncle's a supervillain. His dad hates mutants or anyone with powers, which really sets up this whole dynamic. And it's not even that, it's so much as how these things affect him that's really cool. They really focus a whole lot on that aspect. For example, Ultimate Spider-Man issue number 2, where he's in the park with his dad, and the dad's just talking to him about the things he used to do, about how he went to jail, his uncle went to jail, and that was a really good dynamic. That's probably one of my top favorite comic issues that I've read. But yeah, it's a really good issue. If you haven't read it, I don't know why you haven't, but you should really pick it up. Just in case you wanted to know, the first series ends with Ultimate Spider-Man number 28, and then goes into Cataclysm, and that's a really good issue where his dad abandons him when he finds out he's Spider-Man, and then goes on to his own solo series, which is Miles Morales The Ultimate Spider-Man, which is a great run as well. Sadly, that only lasted 12 issues since they ended the whole universe, but worth the read. I do recommend reading it, picking it up, whatever. Just make sure you read it. Number 2 would be Aquaman, and the new 52 Aquaman, of course. Now, I gotta say, Aquaman is one of my favorite characters. I've read up a lot more about him since this series. Now, saying that, there's not much to read, considering he's never really had a good track record. Now, this character got to start like in More Fun Comics, and after that, DC bought the rights to him, and not much happened. And this kind of makes sense that I didn't really feel attracted to the character. All you would ever see of him is like the 60s Aquaman comics, where he's talking to fish, or just some really goofy character, or even Robot Chicken, where they're making fun of him, or everything that just makes fun of him makes him kind of a goofy character, which is really what he isn't. One of my most recent exposures was a 90s Aquaman, Hook Hand Extreme Aquaman, but that was pretty awful. But a shout out to actually Armin from Comic Book Cast. I don't know if you're listening to this, or anyone who listens to Comic Book Cast. Yeah, shout out to him, man. He got me started on Aquaman. He always talked about it, and he's kind of hyping up Aquaman New 52 when he reviewed it, and he's like, oh, this is so great of a character, and I'm like, well, you know, I'm gonna give it a try, and I was hooked. It really shows what Aquaman should be. The writer and the art, it really clashed together. The Trench was a really good story arc. What I like is they make him also relatable. As you know, most DC characters, they're kind of gods trying to be humans, but it's hard to relate to people like Batman or Superman, where they're invincible and they can do all these things. It's really hard. But then you have Aquaman, who has these great powers, but he doesn't really want them, or doesn't really want to be associated with it. And once people find out, they lash out at him at first, like the whole paparazzi and people who are afraid of him. And he goes away to sea, and he finds out everything about his heritage and what he had missed out on. It was really good. One thing I liked is when he finally gets to Atlantis, he finds out that he should he is the king of Atlantis, but technically isn't. And while he doesn't really want to be the king, but eventually he learns that he has to, it's really big on responsibilities and kind of finding yourself and being comfortable with who you are, which is a really good theme of it. So yeah, anyone who thinks Aquaman is kind of like lame at this point or uncool, I do suggest picking this up. So number 3 actually is kind of back to Spider-Man. Superior Spider-Man. Oh boy, now, this got a lot of hate when it first got announced because in issue The Amazing Spider-Man number 700, everyone was pissed off that Spider-Man died. I mean, this guy got threats, death threats, I mean, you name it. And, you know, I've always kind of tried to be open-minded about new characters. I'm like, alright, well, I like Peter Parker, they killed him off, and now Doc Ock is taking over his body. I don't know, sounds iffy, but I'll give it a read. And it was one of the freshest takes on Spider-Man I've seen in a while. Spider-Man has kind of had a dry run ever since like issue 400, to be honest. He never really went anywhere new. He just stayed the same age or did the same thing, and back with Mary Jane, back with this, back with that, you know, never went anywhere. And this really did something. Superior Spider-Man kind of gave it a darker tone as well. What I like is literally in the first 3 issues, he says, you know what, fuck this, I'm never gonna be with Mary Jane, it's not gonna happen. I might as well end it, I'm just chasing the dead trail. And he does end it, and even Peter Parker's like ghost, I guess, in his mind or memory, kind of says, you know, this guy does things I would never be able to do. Although I still don't like him, but you know, he gets things done. Maybe not in the most convenient way, but what I like is also that Superior Spider-Man, even though he is a supervillain, he is more human than you think. Alright, now, one of my favorite issues, I'll probably have to review this one someday, is, I think it's like number 7 around there, where he fights the Vulture. Alright, so the Vulture, in the previous issue, he had teenagers where he was using them as his partners in crime. But this time he took it a step further and had kids. Like, I want to say 6 through 10-year-olds. And they captured Spider-Man and they took him to the Vulture's lair and they started kind of like beating him up. But since Doc Ock was friends with the Vulture, he's like, hey man, hold on. I don't want any trouble with you, you know? You know, I'll give you money, I have a bank account, I'll give you the money, just leave Manhattan and never come back. And I won't bother you again. But Vulture thought he was joking and all this ensues. And Superior Spider-Man ends up punching one of the Vulture minions, who are the kids. And he sees that it's a kid because the mask falls off and he just loses it. It really gives you an idea of how human he is, because it gives you a flashback to how Doc Ock was abused as a kid. And even though he might do all this horrible crap, he doesn't hit kids. He kind of loses it on Vulture and just like, how could you have kids? You made me hit a kid. How could you do that? It was an insult to him. And he just, I think he pretty much murders the Vulture at the end of the issue. It's pretty gruesome, but it kind of justifies his actions once you know more about Doc Ock and the flashbacks and everything that he goes through. What I do like is at the end of the series, because it ended like at number 32, I think, and he did get rid of Peter's consciousness in the middle of the series because he didn't want it, but at the end he did realize that in order to be the true superior Spider-Man, he had to do the right thing at the end. I don't want to spoil too much, but I will say that he made a big choice. He had to give up something really big in order to become superior. And yeah, you gotta read that as well. It's number 3 on there for a reason, and pick it up and read it if you haven't. Number 4, I gotta say Spawn. Now obviously I haven't read the whole run yet. There's like 100, 200 something issues. I did recently just start reading it. I'm on issue about 30, 35, and I love it. Now, the first 2 issues are really great because he's this whole Hellspawn demon kind of guy with all these amazing powers. But throughout the whole 2 issues, he kind of has flashback memories that were taken away from him just to like purely out of the joy to fuck with them, and he gets them back and it's extremely painful. And in the second issue, he goes to save this woman and he does a great job. You know, he uses his powers, scares the criminals and does all his thing. But right after, the woman is scared. She's kind of huddled up and he's looking at her. You don't have to be scared anymore. And she's just like, don't hurt me, please don't hurt me, that whole kind of thing. And Spawn's about to like grab her and kind of take her home or something, and he has a flashback and it all goes dark and all you see is like the flashbacks in the illustrated, and then you see in like once you turn the page you see Spawn huddled up like in a fetal position, and the girl who was scared of him is hugging him and like caressing his head, and she's like, it's okay, you don't have to like cry anymore, it's all gonna be okay. And he's like, Spawn's crying, and like it's a really cool issue. He's not human anymore, but he's still human. He still gets hurt by emotions and all this. It's really cool to see. It kind of makes you feel bad for him. And even the clown, the Violator, he adds the whole humor to the comic, and just the way the comic is written, illustrated, it's really good. It's amazing. As I said, I haven't read much on it, so I can't really go too much into detail, but it is my number 4 out of all the comics I have read. It's up there, so I do recommend reading it. Issue number 1 isn't even that expensive for being a number 1 for a character a lot of people like. I don't know, it's like 10 bucks, 20 bucks, so I do recommend picking it up and reading it, or even at least go to Wikipedia and search up the character. It's really cool. And so that's it for Spawn. Now, number 5. As I said in the beginning, I was split between Green Arrow and East of West, which is an Image character, or Image comic run. Now, both have their good things, but I did end up going with Green Arrow. Now, I ended up going with the late 80s, early 90s run, which is by Mike Grell. And this is a really cool one. It's not like the Green Arrow you kind of know and love. It's actually more true to the comics, but at the same time it's like the newer show Arrow, I guess, in a way. He's really more humanized. He doesn't really have any great powers. He isn't rich. He's in his older, at least 40s or 50s, I want to say. And what the way this thing starts is he's a pretty chill guy. He's basically the Democrat free thinker of the DC universe in all reality. He has a flower shop, that's where he gets his money from, and he lives with his wife Dinah. Oh, also look that up. Dinah and Oliver Queen, best relationship in comics I have seen. They're like the chillest couple in the world. It's just really cool and funny the way they interact. But anyways, he is a planter. I guess his origin story is important. It's really simple. It gets it through with like in the first 2 issues. He is rich in the beginning. He goes on the cruise. The ship falls or sinks. Everyone dies. He gets on the life raft. He floats to an island, and he's there for about 2 years. And then these like pirates come on the island. Since he's practiced his bow and arrow, since he's had to kill animals and to survive and eat, he threatens them and steals their boat, and then goes back to civilization. I think it's like 2 years or 5 years he was gone around there. Pretty sure it was like 2 in the comics. But after he goes back, he starts his life basically where I left off, with his wife Dinah, and his costume is honestly just a Halloween costume. It's plain and simple, just like that. It's a Halloween costume. He sees a criminal. He has a Robin Hood costume, because that's a big influence for him in the comics. Every time you go into his lair, it's always the Robin Hood poster right there, just focusing in on it, which makes it a big deal. So there's this criminal and he's like, hey, I have a Robin Hood costume and a bow and arrow, let's stop him. And he ends up stopping them and people start calling him the Green Arrow. And that's really the start of his origin right there. The comic then goes on, oh, just so you know, he's not in Star City here. He's actually in Seattle. Which, again, shout out to comic book cast Joel, who was criticizing recent run of Green Arrow, who was saying, hey, why is he in Seattle? He's never been in Seattle. He has been in Seattle before, in a great run. So, haha, got you there, man. Also, if you haven't read it, read it. Read it, Joel. It's a great run. So, anyways, away from that, he is in Seattle and there's a whole bunch of crime, and he gets involved from lower street crime to taking out thugs to this whole like CIA, FBI, people interfering with him, and kind of goes on these whole big adventures and tries to stop criminals. It even kind of goes to whole supernatural realms. In one issue he goes to London and to stop like the Triad and the Yakuza, because they get involved a lot in Green Arrow. And he meets Constantine in order to stop like some ghost. And it's, I want to say like a small scope story, but it gets big pretty quick. Around issue 30, he's never been like rich once he starts being Green Arrow, but in issue 30 he just goes broke because the FBI or CIA Yakuza kind of screwed him over and he lost everything. So he goes away from his house, which he lives like in a castle. Literally that's flower shop. And Dinah's just cool with him leaving, so he leaves for a couple of like months or years to find himself. And he goes through all these things. He ends up going to Africa. He goes to like some island forest. He goes to Canada where he meets a really cool character. And he just kind of finds himself. It's a really cool issue. It doesn't have to have action every issue. Most of the issues are just character development and good storytelling in general. So, I don't know how else to kind of get people hooked on it. It's a small scope story about Green Arrow in Seattle, who ends up getting messed up with people in the Yakuza FBI. He finds trouble everywhere he goes. He has a relationship with Shadow, who is a way more badass character in this story than in Arrow. She's actually like a legit archer who fucks Arrow and all that. And Dinah is Black Canary, badass. She's basically Rambo the person, like Rambo personified, grenades and machine guns everywhere. But just like Green Arrow, everyone gets fucked up in this story. It's a good run. It's the Mike Grell Green Arrow, late 80s, early 90s. If you haven't read it, I do recommend reading it. It's a great run. And that's it for my top 5 comic series. So if you have any questions, I guess, on these kind of stories and whether you should pick them up or not, I guess you can leave your comments down below, and remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and also let me know what your top 5 comic series are. And thank you for listening.